My name is Nicole Monies. I'm with the Florida Department of Transportation in District 1, and I'm the District Environmental Permits Coordinator. My presentation will be wildlife crossing location decision making along the Florida Interstate 4 corridor. Florida is one of the fastest growing areas in the United States, gaining 900 new residents each day. Much of this growth has occurred along the I-4 corridor, which includes urban centers of Tampa, Orlando, and Daytona Beach, and has an average annual daily traffic volume of over 90,000. Due to rapid development and associated habitat fragmentation adjacent to I-4, identifying potential locations for wildlife crossings and protecting the remaining habitat connections between South and North Florida has become extremely important. Some tools that we utilize to identify potential locations for these wildlife crossings are Florida Panther vehicle collision hotspots, least cost pathways, animal telemetry data, conservation lands data, future land use maps, Florida Ecological Greenways Network, and panther mortality data. So why are these tools important? FDOT wants to ensure long-term viability and usage of each crossing. The Florida Panther vehicle collision hotspots and panther mortality data helps us determine if there's an immediate need. The least cost pathways assist in determining whether the animals might cross. Conservation lands data and future land use maps ensure these lands adjacent to the proposed crossing is under conservation and will not be developed. Animal telemetry data. This is known data where the animals are crossing. And the Florida Ecological Greenways Network. This identifies the corridors listed as important to the state of Florida. I will be focusing on FDOT's District 1, specifically in Polk County. Per the 1998 EA FONSI for I-4, FDOT committed to provide the opportunity for wildlife corridor enhancement by constructing low-level bridges at 3 locations in Polk County. Over the years, several modifications to the crossing locations and design criteria have been proposed. FDOT published a reevaluation of the I-4 wildlife crossings in 2016. And then in January 6, 2017, FDOT hosted a stakeholder meeting wherein new locations and design criteria for 3 Polk County wildlife crossings were established and agreed to by both FWC and FWS. So out of these 3 locations, we're going to start with Saddle Creek. So the Saddle Creek crossing would connect the Peace River Saddle Creek to the Green Swamp. There are several obstacles to this particular location. To the south, there are currently vacant lands, which were old Tinnerock mining lands, and is now a fish management area with potential future development towards the west. However, none of these lands are currently under conservation. Another obstacle is the Polytechnic College is to the east, along with the 4-lane road that runs west to east along the south of the proposed crossing. And then directly to the north of the crossing is a new commercial warehouse. So again, we have the new commercial warehouse, and then we have State Road 33 is another barrier, along with a local road. So here you can see the future hospital, which was the future development. We would need some type of conservation lands here to allow the corridor for the animals to cross. Again, we have the Polytechnic Road and the college here. Here's the warehouse. And then north of this is the Halochi Wildlife Management Area, which is under conservation. So there are different types of crossings that are evaluated for each specific location. Ultimately, for the Saddle Creek crossing, an overpass was chosen. Many factors came into play, such as the availability of right-of-way, the existing profile and elevation of the current road, and the cost. Preliminary cost estimates for a wildlife underpass exceeded $15 million, which did not include the legacy costs for an ultimate build out of the interstate. FDOT investigated the potential for an overpass, which only required right of way on the north side of I-4, since FDOT already owned property to the south. And this particular overpass would only cost $8 million, which accommodates the ultimate build out of I-4. As a state transportation agency, we are limited in what we can influence beyond our right-of-way. To identify wildlife corridors which need to be protected beyond the limits of the I-4 corridor, it will take a collaborative effort with many stakeholders such as private landowners, local agencies and municipalities, state and federal agencies, conservation groups, land trusts, counties and cities, and NGOs. Directly to the north was a proposed commercial warehouse that required permits from FDOT and the Water Management District. FDOT was able to work with the warehouse owner to secure right-of-way for the touchdown for the proposed overpass for the wildlife crossing. And the Saddle Creek crossing currently is not funded for construction. The next project we're going to look at is the Western Green Swamp. And this project is currently under construction. So we mentioned money earlier. Incorporating an identified crossing to an upcoming roadway capacity project. This adding funds to a project which is already programmed is much easier. The PD&E design and construction efforts have already been programmed. If we're looking at obtaining funding for a standalone wildlife crossing project, adding this project to the work program can be very challenging. Hiring consultants, construction firms, separate mobilization, FDOT staff and resources, it can become very costly. So for this project, we had currently an I-4 at 557 interchange project programmed for construction. So we were able to extend the limits and include a wildlife crossing. Some more data collection that FDOT does is we utilize motion activated trail cameras. FDOT has placed these cameras on both sides of I-4 to better understand the type and abundance of wildlife in the vicinity of each identified potential crossing. So this was done prior to design of the crossing in its current location. And as you can see on I-4 South, we had wildlife as well as on the north of I-4. FDOT initially considered replacing an existing box culvert with a new bridge which would accommodate wildlife. Ultimately, the design build contractor chose to extend the box culvert and provide a separate wildlife crossing bridge structure. Even with this data, predicting how Florida's wildlife will behave and propagate is difficult. The use of telemetry data has assisted the Panther Recovery Implementation Transportation Subteam including FDOT, to evaluate the wildlife usage of existing dedicated crossings as well as bridges that were not specifically intended for wildlife connectivity. So here on your right, you'll see this is a bear telemetry. So if you'll notice, this bear crossed US 27 and came here along I-4 and could not find a way to get across I-4 and headed back down south. So our current wildlife crossing that is under construction here would have captured that bear and allowed him to pass safely under I-4. Other wildlife crossing locations in consideration. One of them is the Eastern Green Swamp. So there's a lack of protected conservation lands and defined wildlife corridor to connect Reedy Creek across US 27 and US 1792. So here in this green is the conservation areas. This project is not currently funded. Some other considerations is the potential for the Bright Line passenger train running through the I-4 median, creating additional barrier, which would trigger the need for a wildlife crossing. So this is another important reason of looking into this Eastern Green Swamp location. Brightline's new South Terminal at the Orlando International Airport is part of Phase 2 expansion into Central Florida, including a Tampa extension. So another example would be I-4 at Reedy Creek. Wildlife shells are planned as part of the I-4 Ultimate build-out widening for this particular area. Construction is not currently funded. Here's Celebration Boulevard at Reedy Creek is a new roadway that is being constructed adjacent to I-4. Wildlife fencing would need to be hidden and aesthetically acceptable to Walt Disney World and the adjacent tourism area, which is another obstacle and item that we would have to look into. Also, currently with the Celebration Boulevard, no wildlife shelves are provided in the design. Another example is on State Road 33 here at the Western Green Swamp. This parallels I-4 immediately to the north. So here's I-4 and here's where State Road 33 is. Other local roadways, currently low traffic volumes inhibiting wildlife movement, will need to be monitored for future retrofits once the I-4 and State Road 33 crossings are constructed. FDOT is actively pursuing improvements for wildlife permeability along I-4. Wildlife corridors need to be preserved to ensure viability of proposed crossings. We would need to build partnerships with both permitting agencies, local governments, and NGOs. Roadways, both state and local, adjacent to I-4 need to be considered for wildlife crossings as well. And better awareness of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network at the local planning and permitting level is needed. So what are our next steps? So the PRIT Transportation Subteam is finalizing the least cost pathways modeling, which includes I-4. The Southwest Florida Panther hotspots is continuously being updated. The review wildlife corridor impediments to planned I-4 crossings. Opportunities for more GPS telemetry data to help verify or justify crossing locations. And finally, Senate Bill 976, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, recently was released. This legislation directs FDEP to encourage and promote investments in areas to protect and enhance the Florida Wildlife Corridor. To support these efforts, the Florida Leads budget dedicates funds specifically to protect the wildlife corridor. Thank you. And our next presentation will be Brent Setchell.